guys, this is Amber from the Happy Caravan. I'm a mom of 10 kids and we live in New York City. And I'm pregnant with number 11. And so I was listening to some other moms tell their birth stories online. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'll kind of go one by one and tell some of our birth stories. This is birth story number 3. I've already told birth story number 1 and 2. So this was a pretty normal pregnancy. The baby I'm talking about is Elijah. He is 17 now. I don't know how that happens. They grow so quickly. But he is a very, very, just an amazing kid. You know, it's like you don't know what you have until you birth it sometimes, you know. But anyway, I had a very easy pregnancy with Elijah, it seemed like, until the very end. It was so easy, and that was problematic because my pregnancy before that was also very easy. Pearl is my second baby, and the pregnancy was like, just went as planned. And so Elijah was kind of just going as planned, you know, just, and I had a nurse practitioner that was seeing me, and she would always just be like, oh, you're cruising, you're sailing, you're good, you know. And I never even had a sonogram. I'm not sure, like, if the insurance would pay for it or whatever. There's a lot of, like, that was before, like, a lot of the, you know, regulations about what insurance is supposed to pay for were in effect. And so I think I just kind of was just kind of floating through that pregnancy. Kind of old-fashioned, you know, no sonogram. Back in the day, obviously, there were no sonograms. So, you know, everything seemed fine. I was measuring okay, my weight was going up. One thing about what was going on around me in that situation was there was this guy, and I don't even know if he was married yet, but he was at my church, and he was like, oh, looks like you've been eating too many Twinkies. And I think he was just joking, but I really took that personally, and I was like, maybe I'm looking fat. And so one thing I did kind of towards the end of that pregnancy was I was more careful with what I ate, too careful. And I still ate. It wasn't like I was anorexic or anything, but you know, it would come to the end of the evening, and you know, for some reason, even with this pregnancy, I find myself craving Cheerios and milk right before I go to bed. But you know, with when I was pregnant with Elijah, I was like, oh, I better not eat that, you know, just because like extra calories, right? Even though it's healthy, it's still like, well, I don't need that. And so I kind of limited what I ate towards the end, and I didn't really, you know, notice anything. I did, in the last month before, not the last month, maybe the last 3 weeks before he was born, I noticed that when I laid down or if I exerted myself, my face would feel really flushed, just really hot, like just, it was strange. And I didn't quite know what that was. And it wouldn't happen every time, but like occasionally. And so the week before he was born, my nurse practitioner went on vacation, the one that was kind of like, oh, you're cruising, you're sailing, you know, barely checked me, like everything was fine. She went to London. I think it was that Thursday, a couch from IKEA was delivered to our house. And I was just kind of this like, I'm going to do it myself kind of lady, you know. And so, like, I don't know if the couches from like this from IKEA still come this way, but it was really like, they were kind of like overstuffed pillows, but everything was not covered. So the cover for the couch was separate. And so I was stuffing the pillows in, and I just felt my face getting really flushed. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to finish this. And I was trying to be very heroic, you know, towards the end of that pregnancy. And that Friday, so this, I think the couch was delivered on either Wednesday or Thursday, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna muscle through this. Then that Friday, I saw it was actually a doctor, because the nurse practitioner was in London. And, you know, I expected more of the same, oh, you're sailing, you're cruising, you're, you know, so I went in and they weighed me, and I weighed, you know, less. And, of course, you know, I was trying not to gain too much, but still weighing less is kind of towards the end of pregnancy is like, something's going on there. But I was kind of like proud of myself, and the nurses were like, oh, you know, they like kind of applaud you for like losing weight, you know, it's like, okay. And then I went in to see the doctor, and I had Josiah and Pearl with me. who were, you know, toddler, basically. I think Josiah was like 3 and Pearl was like, you know, 1.5 or almost 2. And so it was just kind of like, they were like down at the floor, you know, the doctor's checking me out, and he's like, you know, you're measuring small. So for some reason here in New York City, they don't do the measuring thing, but in San Diego, they always did it. And also in the Bay Area, I had my last baby that I had before this one that I'm pregnant with, I had Moses in Oakland, and that doctor at Kaiser always measured me too, so I don't know what it is about New York City, and maybe it's not a thing here, but anyway, so like you're supposed to be as many centimeters, I think, as you are weeks along, which is kind of cool. So that's, you know, what they did, and he's like, you know, you're measuring small, I think you need a sonogram. So I kind of felt a little bit of movement from the baby. I was 36 weeks and like, you know, 5 days. So I was really close, you know, to being technically full term. So I didn't feel a lot of movement, but I felt some movement. I was still getting that flushing in my face when I laid down. Didn't really understand it. And then, so over the weekend, he kind of, I didn't really feel him move much. I think I felt some hiccups. And then on Sunday, I really didn't feel much movement at all. And so I just kind of took it easy, laid down. And I should have called labor and delivery, because when you don't feel movement, you know, much at all for a long time, that's problematic. Word to the wise, things you learn after the fact. So the Friday doctor ordered the sonogram on Monday. And so Monday I went in. Monday around, I'd say 9 o'clock in the morning. Mark was at work. I think my mom was probably watching the kids. That was before the kids. Now I can go to the OBGYN without a babysitter, because my kids are like, you know, some of them are adults and they can watch the little ones. But so my mom was at home watching the kids, and I went into the sonogram, and you know, the sonogram technician was looking in there, and you know, like when they don't say anything and they're like, I'm gonna go talk to the doctor, you know. And so and then the doctor came in, and like I was like, okay, what's wrong? And he says there's almost no fluid. The baby is I was 37, Monday was the 37 weeks to the day. He said he's, you know, he was able to tell. He said the baby's 4 pounds 11 ounces. And it looks like you have backflow to the placenta. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it means somehow it meant that every, like you can see the blood flow, every time Elijah's heart would beat, like there was like a pull back to the placenta, and I guess my blood pressure was high, and so not that high, but it was high-ish. But after like I found out something was wrong, I think my blood pressure was like really high. And I think, you know, they were kind of like, they don't want to freak you out, because they know that's obviously not a good situation to have like a freaked out mom, but I was freaking out. And I had, I think they said I had protein in my urine, which is a sign of preeclampsia, the high blood pressure, protein in urine. IUGR is what ended up happening with Elijah, which is intrauterine growth restriction. So he, at 37 weeks, should not have been 4 pounds 11 ounces. He should have been much bigger. But the doctor said in the sonogram, was like, it's like he's running a marathon. So there was, you know, he was working really hard, you know, just to stay alive. And so, of course, when his body's working that hard just to stay alive, he's not going to be moving, you know. So kind of a miracle, you know, because the kind of nonchalant nurse practitioner, she was on vacation in London. You know, the doctor that saw me, of course, is a different doctor than I saw at the sonogram, but, you know, the doctor that saw me on Friday was not nonchalant. He was kind of like, oh, you know, let's check this out. Thank the Lord, because, you know, I really didn't, I don't know if I wasn't taught this. Certainly something I know now, but, you know, when the baby doesn't move, something's wrong. You need to do something. If you don't feel movement, go in. And so they brought me to labor and delivery. They're like, you need to have, he said, this baby needs to come out today. That doctor in the sonogram, today. That's it. This baby needs to come out. not doing well. So I went in and they started the potential induction process. They had me monitored, and they looked at his heart rate, and when I had a contraction, which I wasn't feeling really strong contractions, just little mini ones, but even those mini ones, they were registering on their monitoring system, and the contractions were showing, the monitoring system was showing that every time I had a contraction, his heart rate was going down. And that's not supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is when you have a contraction, the baby's heart rate is supposed to go up. So the opposite was happening. So I don't know if there was blood flow. I'm not sure, what was causing that. But obviously he was already struggling in utero. So they're like, okay, we need a cesarean. And it wasn't like a emergency cut this baby out because there's no heart rate at all type of thing. But I was able to have a low transverse, thankfully. They brought me into the operating room, and my doctor that had delivered actually my other two babies, whose name was Dr. Carl Evelyn, he was a really good doctor. So it was nice in this chaos. The doctor I saw on Friday, the doctor I saw on the sonogram. I'd never seen those guys before, but Dr. Evelyn was somebody I knew from the last two births, and so that was it was just so nice to see him. He was this really, I don't even know if he's still working. He worked at Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego, and he was from, I think he was from Haiti. So he had this cool accent, and I was just so grateful to see him. I was like, okay, somebody, a familiar face, because it's just such chaos, it's nice to see a familiar face. So he's like, okay. Now he didn't want to perform the cesarean right away because I think, I don't know if it's every hospital, but in this hospital, when you're performing cesarean, there need to be 2 doctors in the room. And so they got me ready, It was so cold. I'd never been so cold in my life. They're like freezing. In this room, this operating room, and they put down the sheet, and I think they also gave me an epidural because, cesarean is not something you want to feel. And so they put the sheet over so I couldn't see. I think psychologically, if you see yourself being opened, there's the possibility of fainting from seeing that, because it's just too much sometimes, But, in the room, so he waited for the other doctor to come, and they did Mark was impressed. He was able to watch it. I don't know, he doesn't have a blood and guts problem, I guess. But he said they did a really nice cut, and I'm like, okay, like the play-by-play. So I guess, if you're a surgeon, I don't know, if I was cutting into skin, I probably would do a bad job of it, but if you're a surgeon, you know how to do these things, and there's several layers, I guess, they have to get through. I can feel it because when I feel the scar tissue there, I can feel that there's obviously the skin, the little, scar from the cesarean, but then I feel that there's other layers that are still the sensitivity there is a little bit, I don't feel, it used to be that I would be wearing a shirt that was maybe a little too short or whatever. I'm back in the, I don't know, early 2000s, all the skirts were kind of lower on your waist. And so sometimes there'd be a gap there and I wouldn't even feel it. And somebody tell me, oh, you can see your tummy. I'm like, oh, sorry. Because just the nerves, where it was hard for me to feel air. Normally you'd feel air, blowing on your tummy that's showing. But anyway, so they cut me through all the layers, and he was born, and he was, I don't remember, I think he had kind of a lower APGAR score. He was kind of pale. They brought him immediately to the NICU, just because with the IUGR and all the things, it seemed like he needed help. And at the same time, around this time, I guess somehow my blood pressure was really, really high. And they were just trying to get me back to ground zero. So they gave me, I don't know if this is what they do for everyone that has preeclampsia, but they gave me, I think it was magnesium, a lot of magnesium to bring down my blood pressure. And that is it's very uncomfortable. I remember my muscles just aching, and I just felt like I was blacking out. And it was so weird. And so, you know, he was born in the morning, but it wasn't until kind of the evening that I was able to go to the NICU and see him. And I remember them, I was just so exhausted. I remember them giving him to me, and I don't know if it was to nurse or something. I don't know if he was able to. And I held him in the chair, and I was in a, because I just, you know, they just, after cesarean, you know, they wheel you around, you know. I almost dropped him because I blacked out. But the nurses and Mark were there, and I think they could tell, you know, like, he didn't fall or anything, but, like, that was just so traumatic. I just felt like the worst mother in the world, you know, like, I can't even hold my baby. But so I went back to the, I don't know a lot of what happened. They say that, I think he might have had pneumonia the first night, something like that. He does have 2 little scars right here. So I don't know what that's from. I don't know if that's from monitors, you know, right after he was born, or if that was, you know, if they, I don't think they like had to, you know, poke into his lungs, but I don't know. I was so oblivious as to what was happening. So it just, he was in the NICU, and I didn't know what was going on. I was in the hospital room. Like, after you have a cesarean, they let you stay for 3 days to recover. Insurance, again, that's what they allow. And so just like they did a CT scan of his brain. When things like that happen, where your baby's not getting sufficient blood flow in utero, bad things can happen. And, you know, there can be brain damage and so forth. And so they did a CT scan of his brain, and amazingly, I think it showed up as normal. And then he had something called, I'm not sure what it was. Oh, low platelets. Okay, so low platelets, and I'm not sure why that was the case, but his platelets were really low, and so they had to administer something. I forget what it's called. They had to administer an IV to try and get his platelets back up. And then what ended up happening was Josiah and Pearl, this was like, he was in the NICU for 10 days. So just by this time, Josiah and Pearl were able to come see him and so forth. And scary thing that happened was, we didn't know it. I guess she had a chickenpox vaccine, but Pearl actually had chickenpox coming into the NICU, which is like, you're not supposed to do that. We couldn't tell because she had been vaccinated for it, so it was barely noticeable. But what ended up happening was that because that had happened, they actually administered that same IV that they gave to Elijah to get his platelets up. They gave it to all the babies in the NICU, just because I guess it helps raise your immunity. So, I mean, obviously that was a mistake. Had we known she had chickenpox, we would not have brought her into the NICU. But, you know, it was very brief, but still, you know, they just want to take all the precautions they can. So it just seemed like every time I went down to the NICU, there was something wrong, and I tried to nurse him, you know, but they said he had a lazy suck. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, he would nurse and fall asleep immediately. And with my previous 2, you know, if they fell asleep, it's because they were satisfied. They had, you know, food. But what ended up happening was, you know, they every day they measure his diapers, and he just didn't have much coming out, and he was losing weight, and they're like, he's not getting a lot of milk. And so they supplemented with formula. And by this time I was staying in a sleep room, which is an extra room that they have. I don't know if they still have things like this. I mean, it's just nice. There's no food service. It's just kind of bare bones. There's like a bathroom and a bed, and a lot of times you're sharing it with like another mom or something. So it's not like, you know, Ritz-Carlton or anything, no room service. But I mean, there was a cafeteria, and I would just eat at the cafeteria, you know, at Kaiser. No, it wasn't Kaiser. Mercy Hospital, San Diego, is where it was. And so I ate at the cafeteria, and would visit Elijah as much as I could. And eventually, he got through the low platelets. His platelets came back up. We supplemented with formula, and I was just like pumping. And my milk supply had gone down to, like, I think they give you these little bottles that measure, you know, how much milk you're putting out. My milk supply had gone down to like 2 cc's, which is like, that's how little milk I was able, and this was like day, like, 4 or 5, like I should have had more milk by then. Just that him not drinking, I guess, did not kick my body into gear. And so, and like, it was like really painful. Now I think the pumps are a little nicer, but back then I was like, my nipples were bleeding, and it was like pink milk, and I was like freaked out. I was like, oh, is this okay? And the nurse was like, oh yeah, that's normal. I'm like, okay. But, so it was just this, like, I remember the Olympics were going. I was watching the Olympics. It was 2006. And it was February 2006. And I just felt so disoriented. It was so weird. I did not know what to do. And so finally, by like day 9-ish, he had gotten through a lot of the problems he'd had. And then, I think it was like day 9 or 10, they did a hearing test, and he failed in both ears. And I was like, he had come through so much. I guess I honestly should have just been grateful that, I wasn't dealing with a kid that was potentially brain dead. That's what could have happened. But still, when you're just like your little baby, like, you don't want anything to be wrong with him. So he failed his hearing test in both ears. You're like, oh, don't worry about it. Maybe it's okay, so they signed him up to go to Children's Hospital for a hearing test, I think a few weeks later. So I was just on pins and needles, like, can he hear? It does seem like he's startled when there were like some loud noises, so I was like, okay, maybe he can hear. So what ended up happening was he was able to do the hearing test, at Children's Hospital in San Diego. And his right ear miraculously was normal, but his left ear had high-frequency hearing loss. And it was much better high-frequency hearing loss then than it is now. Unfortunately, just with everything that was going on with him, his eustachian tubes and so forth were not draining correctly, and so he ended up having ear infections. And foolish me, not really considering the fact that I had a kid with immunity struggles and so forth. We went to a church that was very big into, like, drop your kid off at the nursery, and, so I dropped him off at the nursery, but there were other kids there with ear infections, and they're sharing pacifier, and he always had a pacifier, which I'm not a huge fan of pacifiers, but it is convenient. So kids were sharing pacifiers, and just, so he ended up getting ear infections, and he also ended up having something called febrile seizures from those ear infections. This is, of course, this is beyond the birth story. I'm just explaining the ear deterioration issues. But so after, he had a couple, maybe 3 seizures. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 seizures. So by this time he was seeing an ENT, which is the ear, nose, and throat doctor. He's seeing Dr. Carvalho in San Diego Children's Hospital. Really nice, really kind, very talented ear, nose, and throat surgeon. And she suggested that because of the seizures, you may want to try some ear tubes. And so we did try the ear tubes, and everything seemed okay. It seemed like it was a good idea, because she's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there, like, just the goo can, the mucus and so forth can just stay in there and not, if it can't drain correctly through your eustachian tubes. This is the other thing. He also had asthma. And so he, one time he couldn't breathe, and I guess it was when he was kind of like in the 9-month range, and he couldn't breathe when he was, eating, and I was just like so scared, and so he ended up throwing up, and I ended up bringing him to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician's like, oh, it looks like he has asthma, and so, they gave me the albuterol, but they're also like, you should probably go on these Pulmicort Respules, which is for asthma. It's a low-dose steroid that you inhale. But one of the things that those the asthma medication steroid can cause is ear infections, because I guess, I don't know how this works, but steroids, I guess, dampen your ability to fight infection. So he ended up getting, just all these ear infections. We're still dealing with the asthma and the febrile seizures. And so we decided to go for the ear tubes. And miraculously, his right ear, the ear tube, did what it was supposed to. It healed out. The left ear it didn't heal. And this is the ear that already had the high frequency hearing loss. And so he ended up having a hole in his eardrum that was a 25% hole, which is huge. And it affected his low frequency hearing, and it's just you're not supposed to get water in there then. It's just complicated, This is when he was about 3, and at this time, our family's music was starting to kind of explode. Like Josiah was, really starting to be very accomplished at the violin. Pearl, was also pretty accomplished at the violin for a little, girl, toddler, I don't know, she was like 4 years old. And then, so Elijah was starting the cello, and the reason we had him start the cello was because of the high frequency hearing loss. We're like, it's a low frequency instrument. And so, like, all of a sudden, hearing, which meant a lot. I mean, with one ear working, speech is frustrating, sometimes if someone's talking over here. Like in It's a Wonderful Life, like the main character, I forget what his name is, George, I think, George. He has one ear that he can hear from and one ear that he can't hear from, and it's like, this kind of cute thing because, people can whisper something in the ear you can't hear from, and, anyway, so, like, yeah, obviously you can function with one ear that hears and the other ear that doesn't hear very well or not at all. But with music, it's just complicated because you're supposed to be able to hear music from all the places. And anyway, so Elijah was, starting the cello, and so I cared even more about his hearing. And I think, just being kind of like a twitty, like, my baby's broken, fix him, mom. So I was, with Dr. Carvalho, I was like, so, when can we do a surgery to correct this? Because the way you correct it is you put a graft on his eardrum, and you put gel foam behind it, and then some, I don't know if it's some sort of something on top to try and keep it healthy. And so, we did that. We'd had the ear surgery, but she wouldn't do it before he was 4. She's like, well, we probably should wait later, but if you really want to, we can do it as soon as, when he's 4. In the spring, we want to get him past the winter. And, hindsight being 2020, I wish I would not have been like, oh yeah, let's do it as soon as possible. I want his eardrum healed. Because that surgery did not work. It did not heal. And it ended up being, he was left with a 30% hole. And, then he ended up having a fungal infection. I think he was like 8 when he had a fungal infection. And that was, in his ear canal. But then because that hole, he was able to get in there, and then his hearing deteriorated even more. And I'm just like, I went through kind of a really intense depression from 2014 to like 2016-ish. It was better after that, but I mean, part of it had to do with that fungal infection and Elijah's hearing getting worse, and I just felt like the world was crashing in on me. I know it wasn't, and I know I just need to be grateful for whatever was not wrong with him. But I don't know, as a mommy, you just freak out. And so we ended up, he ended up having, I was like, after that, I was like, okay, doctor, whenever you think he should have another surgery, let's do it. So he ended up having another surgery, I think when he was maybe 10 or 11. And it was more successful, but a hole still remained. And then when we went to San Francisco, there we saw another ENT, and he did another surgery, and it was some smaller hole, but still, that hole has just been so stubborn. And his hearing, it's still not great in the low frequencies now too, so because of all the surgeries. And so it's been hard for me. That's been a hard pill for me to swallow, just because, I just wanted everything to be okay. I wanted to, I just wanted to be able to fix him, and it's like, I can't fix him. And that's something, that, like, it's so easy to say, let go and let God. It sounds so pious and holy. it's easier said than done. So anyway, I'm learning. I've had to learn to let go and just trust the Lord. And I haven't found an ENT here in New York City yet. I've heard from Dr. Chan. That's who we saw in Dylan Chan at, I think, San Francisco Children's Hospital. That's who did the surgery. The last surgery he had. I haven't really seen an ENT here in New York. I think he said New York Presbyterian has good ENTs. I'm not sure. I think New York Presbyterian is associated with Columbia University, so that would make sense, you know. But so it's just at this point, I don't know if even trying to fix the hole again is even something that should be done. I don't know. It would just be nice to see an ENT just to have them, even just taking out earwax or whatever, because when you have something that's amiss in your ear tries to protect it, and put a bunch of earwax and stuff there, and so it kind of builds up and makes hearing even more complicated. So, and just to make sure things aren't deteriorating, and I don't know if we can do anything about it anyway, but sorry, I'm mumbling it out. But to me, it meant a lot. So, but if you've had a kid who's had some health issue where it will not fix, and you have to just trust the Lord for it and know that God loves him more than I ever could, and that he knows better than I ever could. Just that has been three, if I could pick three things that have just really knocked me back, that was definitely one of the top three things. And it's good. I mean, this has helped me. His birth, not going perfectly, cesarean, his health not being perfect, everything from the asthma to the ear infections to a surgery, surgery cannot correct this problem he has, with his hearing and so forth. And along this, I'm super grateful that his right ear has stayed normal. It's on the charts, hearing test is normal. So that's a huge blessing. And the cello is in front of him, as opposed to, that's why I didn't have him play. Some people are like, oh, did your kids pick their instruments? I'm like, well, sort of. But, I didn't want him to play the violin because that's a high frequency instrument with your left ear. And while his right ear could probably hear it in an orchestra situation, that may be more of a challenge. So I don't know. I'm not really sure. But one thing, I actually wrote a children's book called Zakar Circus, and it's about these animals that aren't quite right, but they're able to be, make a nice circus anyway type of thing. And that was kind of he was the inspiration for that, because there's been times I used to always play with the kids at events and stuff, and there's been times when he's like, Mom, I can't really hear my cello, because particularly it's not so much music that's an issue, but talking. So it was like we were playing at the United Through Reading Storybook Ball, and it was just everyone, drinking champagne and this and that, just so loud, just this hum of conversation that if you have two ears that work normally, you're able to shut that out and be able to listen, either to somebody that's talking to you or your instrument. But when you have one ear that's functioning pretty normally and one ear that's compromised, it's hard to hear your instrument. And he's like, Mom, I can't hear my cello. And I was like, well, do the best you can with what you've got. Use your knowledge of intervals or whatever you can. And he was able to play really well, and we made it through the storybook ball. And so, it's just I've seen God, take a situation that is definitely not perfect, and, just do something. And I don't know what the future holds for Elijah. He's what's funny is I'm not funny, but the things that should most be affected, if you see somebody that's really struggling, who's had low oxygen and this and that, one thing that they struggle with is coordination, or, just overall intelligence, because when your brain is damaged, that can cause those problems. And it seemed like the Lord really did protect his brain in all of those things. The one thing that the Lord allowed to not function 100% correctly is his left ear. And it's just, I think of the story of Jacob, where he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and, Jacob had a limp after that. And, it feels kind of like that, where you know, it's like Elijah's super coordinated, he's super smart, and he's very musical. It's been a struggle because he's auditioned twice for pre-college Juilliard, and he didn't get in both times. The first time, I don't know if he really gave it his best. The second time, I think he did give it his best, really practiced hard, but there were only 4 spots, and he was a senior, and there's not like a lot of like interest necessarily in having seniors, because I guess the thing is teachers don't want to like teach a kid for 1 year, and basically that senior year you're just trying to audition for other schools, and so they, you know, that there's not as much interest in taking in the senior at the pre-college program. So, you know, I don't know why, you know, that's another thing, I don't know why God allowed that to happen, but it's been good. I mean, he's become a lot more humble and a lot more like, you know, just absorbent. Like, you know, when teachers are teaching him something, it's not like, oh, I know this, you know, attitude coming from him. He's really humble about things, which is good, because if you know him, he's a little feisty, and that could be a challenge to bring him to that point of humility. But I think God has amazing things planned for him. I don't know if it involves music. You know, I'm telling him he should maybe try, also maybe do an MBA or something like that too, you know, along with the music, just because music is something that's, it's like art, you know, it is hard to make a living in it. I don't think any of our kids have wasted their time doing music. You know, for instance, the pastor of our church, he did philosophy, and then he did law, and now he's a lawyer, and he's also a preacher, you know, so, you can get some, on the undergrad level, you can do things that maybe aren't the most lucrative and still go on to something that is more lucrative. For instance, you know, like let's say he does really well in his cello, he's auditioning for Juilliard College this year, and also Manhattan School of Music, also Mann School of Music. There's a lot of music schools around here, that's why we moved to the city. You know, but he could probably simultaneously take some kind of business classes at, there's a really good community college around here that's really dedicated to, not a lot of cost, you know, helping kids that may not have opportunities, you know, financially otherwise, to be able to, you know, become lawyers, become, you know, businessmen, become stockbrokers, become all the things, you know, probably even doctors, engineers. So that's a bent, you know, that the community college system around here has. So anyway, I don't know what the future holds. I just know that the hard work, the diligence that he's put into learning the cello, the things he's had to overcome, you know, his hearing and all these things, I think these are all layers upon which he can build his future, if he's just willing to work hard. And that's if you've been a mom of teenage boys, you know how challenging that can be. Like, come on guys, let's have some chutzpah. But anyway, so the story's not over, and thanks for listening to his birth story. It was a positive ending. Obviously, he still had the hearing issues, which broke my heart, but just how God watched over him and had the, you know, kind of the, I'm not supposed to say the wrong, but the kind of the wrong nurse practitioner, like, go on vacation to London, so the right doctor could be like, I don't know. Because if he hadn't scheduled that sonogram on Monday, I don't know if we'd have Elijah, or would Elijah have, you know, the brain damage or whatever from the lack of blood flow. I was a fool. I was a mother that was a fool. I should have gone in. I should have called labor and delivery. Since then, I've been super neurotic with Naomi, which is birth story number 4. I called him all the time, and I was taking my blood pressure all the time. I'm like, oh, it's a little bit elevated, you know. And then the labor and delivery nurses would be like, it's okay, you're fine, don't take your blood pressure so much. Okay, bye-bye, sweetie, you know, like, but she was still moving and stuff. But anyway, oh, the neuroticism. But anyway, yeah, so thanks if you made it this far. I'm surprised. And, but I will say though, a lot of people kind of are curious about Elijah, like, how did he start the cello, you know, who is he, what's going on, and it's hard to explain that in just a little soundbite. His journey has been long, it's been hard, he's gone through a lot of things. He doesn't have the things that all the other normal kids have, as far as his hearing working perfectly and so forth. And that makes him special, you know? I know that's like the term we use when somebody has a disability, but I think it really does make him special. It makes him unique. It makes him a fighter. It makes him feisty. And that's a good thing. And I'm excited to see his story progress. So thanks for watching.